we're going to put in place a targeted intervention that will focus on individuals with certain characteristics here. So I'm going to take this in a different direction. I'd like to add something that I've only featured in maybe one other boot camp over the years. So I'd like to go to this model. And in the interest of time, I won't distribute a new version of it. And I'd like to add in to the model, actually, 2 parameters. This is going to start unassuming, grow strange, but hopefully then grow impressive. Okay? I'd like to drag in to main. I'm going to actually call this version 20, so just so we have a distinct version number associated with it, because I'm undertaking a change of gravity and significance and changing the results. Thank you very much, Jason. Much appreciated. Okay, I'm going to drag in a parameter. This parameter is going to be called is in intervention group. Okay? And next, I am going to add in a parameter called perform intervention. Okay? Okay. Now, these sound like strange parameters. Is an intervention group is going to be a Boolean parameter. It's saying, is it or is it not in the intervention group? But it's designed to allow us to have a targeted intervention group. So it's going to relate to a subset of people. But the thing that's puzzling here is a dynamic, a standard parameter, if we have it be a Boolean, and it's in main, it's going to have one value for everyone, is it not? One value for everyone. So you may ask, how is it this is going to achieve a target intervention? Either everyone's going to be in the intervention group or no one's going to be in it. Just like these other parameters, mean duration of infection applies to everyone in the population. Mean duration of immunity to everyone. Okay? So I could understand why you'd be flummoxed, confused. I hope to resolve that confusion, but recognize what I'm going to do is going to push your comfort zone. Okay? So I'd like to go down to the advanced area and invite you to open that accordion, that area here. Okay? And I'd like you to select dynamic. Ladies and gentlemen, dynamic. Now, when I selected dynamic, something strange happened. I don't know if you noticed. I went from being just a standard parameter to being a dynamic parameter. And suddenly, this arguments appeared. Did you see that? Now, as I said, we computer scientists, you can be excused for thinking we're strange. Oh, terrible. Jason, could you replace these? Yeah, thanks. Because we use the term argument to mean something that's passed to a function, some information it needs to do its job. Okay? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, now with something like this, we're going to be able to actually ask it, hey, is a given person in the intervention group? And it's going to answer back yes or no. Okay? And we're going to be able to use this parameter. Watch this. TAs make note. I rue the day I rue the fact we don't have more of this R-U-E, not R-O-O, that we don't have more of the TAs. I wouldn't mind roos as well, but that would be a bit lively. For those who don't know, a roo is a kangaroo in Australia. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pass in an argument, person, who's going to be of type person. We're going to be able to specify on a per scenario basis different rules for which people are eligible for the intervention. Different rules. I told you I felt like getting up on there. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay. So the audio for this was dysfunctional previously, and now we're going to actually record properly the video with audio. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we've just added a dynamic parameter. I've noted in contrast to a static parameter, for a dynamic parameter, we can actually give it information. It's called an argument. It's associated with a formal parameter that it will need to do its job. In this case, it needs information about who's being considered as eligible for the intervention. You give it a person, and it will tell you, is this person eligible? Yes or no? Okay? It will return a Boolean. That's why it's called a Boolean parameter. But it's a rule. A dynamic parameter is not a value. It's a rule. And we're going to be able to specify a different rule for different scenarios, for different experiments. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, we have this dynamic parameter we've added in contrast to a static parameter where we just say it's Boolean, give it a default value. Here we're going to actually say it's a rule. It takes in a person and it tells us whether or not that person is eligible. So maybe, for example, I'll return the fact if they're eligible by saying if person dot age in years is less than 10, then they're eligible for the intervention. So it is an intervention group. It's going to return a Boolean which says, are they in the intervention group? Okay? That's going to be the default value. But different scenarios are going to specify different rules. This is just the default rule. Just like giving the default value for parameter. Different scenarios are going to be able to specify different rules here. Okay? Okay. That's the idea. Next, we're going to do something else. We've dragged in this parameter called perform intervention. Now this parameter, as you might guess, is also a rule. It does something. It's not a value. It's not an assumed value. It's an assumed rule. It's a rule that says, okay, if you have someone who's subject to the intervention, what do we do to them? What action do we undertake on them? That sounds less transgressive. So this is going to be an action parameter, ladies and gentlemen. An action parameter. It's going to take in a person, one who is subject to the intervention, and it's going to undertake an action on that person. Okay? And the default action, we'll just leave one. You don't want to do anything. Okay? But different scenarios are going to be able to undertake different actions. They'll just specify different rules for this parameter. So, ladies and gentlemen, a dynamic parameter and an action parameter both allow scenarios to specify and undertake different rules. Okay? Different rules that can be specified on a scenario by scenario basis, say for different types of interventions. So ladies and gentlemen, you notice when we said an action parameter, it eliminated it showed us these argument area, but it eliminated the thing that said what type of value does it have. A dynamic parameter is different from an action parameter. A dynamic parameter returns a value, okay? So this dynamic parameter had a value by default. And maybe by default, I said this is the rule, but I'm going to eliminate that rule. I'm going to go back and say, is an intervention group? The answer is going to be false. No one's in the intervention group by default. Okay? So is an intervention group, default value is false. This is the principle I told to Cheryl earlier. And in fact, all of you. That normally we set, in a new parameter, we set it to have something that won't change the existing scenarios. So is an intervention group will have a value, default value of false, meaning no one's in the intervention group by default. Perform intervention will have a default value of nothing, because no action will be undertaken. But it's an action parameter, so you don't even have to specify what type it is. It's an action parameter. It's no type. It just does nothing. That's why it's a default action. Ladies and gentlemen, let me show that again. Is an intervention group is a dynamic parameter of type Boolean, default value false. By default, nobody's in an intervention. This perform intervention is an action parameter with no action being undertaken. Next. Indeed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost done. We're at the cusp of greatness. Okay? I'm going to drag in the event. A drag in an event, and it's going to be called undertake intervention. Okay? For the moment, we're going to leave it, because lunch beckons, we're going to leave it to occur once at the initial time. Now, we could actually change it so we could be more flexible. We could specify, make it actually happen 100 days in, or make it actually happen at these successive times. There's ways we could train this, and if people are interested, tomorrow I could show them ways to generalize this. But there's going to be undertake intervention. It's going to go off at the initial time. That's time 0. Occurs once, timeout. Those are just the defaults. And what it's going to do is the following. It's going to run through each person in the population, see if they're subject to the intervention. Do they match the criteria for the intervention? If so, do what? Perform the intervention action upon them. We'll undertake, maybe we'll improve their diet. Maybe we'll provide them with some education. Maybe we will lower the amount of time they spend infected by priming them to be able to be screened on a regular basis so they're identified if they're ill or what have you. So we're going to say here, for each person in the population, do you remember how you say that? You say for each person in the this dot population. I'm going to use those curly brackets you've learned to apply. They make it quite clear. For each person, what do we first have to do? We have to check if they are subject to the intervention. If is in intervention group, and you'll notice it prompts me. What is it saying I can do with an is in information group? With the traditional parameter, I could just check is it true or false. But here, it's saying I can apply it to a what. I can give it what as an argument. I can pass it what value to do its job. I can pass it, ladies and gentlemen, a person. Why does it have me pass it a person? Does anyone remember? Because do you remember when I showed you that? By the way, you could say if it is, finish that second paren. Why is it asking for a person? Remember when I defined it? I said it takes a person as an argument. It needs this to do its job. The argument's a person. It needs this information to do its job. Because its job in life is going to see, is this person, are they in the intervention group? We could have called it, is person in the intervention group? We give it that person. If they are in the intervention group, guess what we're going to do? We're going to intervene upon them. We're going to say, perform intervention, and we're going to give it the person. We're going to perform the intervention upon them. Okay? So for each person in the population, we're going to assess, are they in the intervention group? If so, we'll undertake the intervention upon them.
So you could do this kind of thing for any type of agent?
Yes.
As long as you are
Yes.
clear with
Yep. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen. So this provides us, so I'll build this. This is going to provide us with exquisite flexibility in undertaking interventions. Because in different scenarios, without modifying the underlying model, no change to name, no change to person, different scenarios will be able to specify different rules, who's eligible for the intervention, what intervention to undertake on them, if they are eligible. Some may not have an intervention. Others may say, I want to intervene on kids less than 10 years old, and for each such child, I want to lower their time infected. Others may say, no, for each child less than 10, I want to extend their immunity in some way, or I want to lower their contact rate. And we can do so without modifying the underlying model, just through these things. So let's just take how it looks. I'm very cognizant of Christine there, who's here to lead you, emancipate you to the sumptuous splendor of the faculty club. But here I'd like you to just examine for me, humor me by adding an alternative. I'd like you to copy baseline with birth, and I'd like you to paste it in. Paste it in. Here's baseline with birth 1, and it's going to be baseline with birth 1, baseline with birth, or sorry, okay, intervention, okay, intervention, so how about, sorry, I'm just thinking of a better name, lower infection duration in ages 0 to 10 with birth. Okay. Bit of a mouthful, but at least it communicates the goal. Okay. This scenario is going to focus on those aged 0 to 10, and it's going to lower their infection duration, maybe by a screening program or what have you. We could have a much more articulated intervention. Here, what I'm going to do is in intervention group, I'm going to change it to be a dynamic value. And in this case, we can ask, okay, is the person dot age in years less than or equal to 10.0? Why is that? Well, I'm doing ages 0 to 10. And if so, what's our change going to be for that person? Well, we'd like to set their, and this is going to take a bit of frobbing, their duration of infection, Christine is shaking her head, we're going to set their duration of infection specifically to be halved. The problem is right now we only have one duration of infection shared amongst everyone, right? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide each person with their own duration of infection. It's going to take not 2 minutes. I'd like you to right-click on this and say copy from main. I'd like you to go to person, right-click on mean duration of infection in main. I'd like you to go to person, and I'd like you to say paste. Boom. It goes into person. Next, what do we have to change to refer to it? In recovery, instead of saying mean duration of infection, what do we change it to? This dot mean duration of infection. Similarly, I'm going to add one parameter here. One parameter. It's going to be called contact rate. Okay? In the palette, I want you to drag a parameter. It's going to be called contact rate. So all I did is I went to main, I went down main, I copied mean duration infection, not cut, copied deliberately. I pasted it into person. I then introduced a new parameter called contact rate, which has a default value of 1.0 into person. So I copied that mean duration of infection into person, and I copied contact rate into person. Okay? And here, I'm going to have, and this is the final change I'm going to make here to person. In this contact location, the rate is 1.0, hard-coded. I'm going to instead refer to what? This dot contact rate. So now, we're going to parameterize their contact rate. Finally, I'm just going to, so what did I do to person? Let's be clear. Main, I right-clicked on mean duration of infection and copied it. I pasted it into person. So now they have a mean duration of infection. I then referred to that in their recovery. I said this dot mean duration of infection, where it used to say main dot mean duration of infection. So now it refers to their own, their personal duration of infection, because we're going to be varying that on a per person basis. Secondly, I created a new parameter called contact rate. It's a double. Its default value is 1.0. And I set this internal transition to refer to this contact rate. Before it was 1.0 hard-coded. Now I want to be able to vary it, contact rate. So what did I do? I just referred to this contact rate. Instead of hard-coding 1.0, I referred to contact rate. And by the way, contact rate, I made the default value 1.0. I think I mentioned. Sorry, question? This one? Yeah. All I did is referred to this dot contact rate. So before, this was 1.0, the rate. Now I'm making it more flexible. I refer to contact rate. Okay? Next, that's all the changes to person. Make sure that builds. Okay. Now it needs to know what's the contact rate to assume. Don't worry about that. We'll get to that in a moment. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we will go and copy this contact rate for a person up to main. paste in Maine. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a default value of the contact rate and a default value of duration of infection that's going to be provided to each person as a default. And they're going to use that as their own by default. But if we change it through an intervention, we can change it on a per person basis. And they're actually going to use their own contact rate, their own one. So they're going to use the global one as by default, but otherwise they'll use theirs. And so we're almost done. And lunch beckons soon. Indeed. Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Christine is being very patient, but patience, even in her, has its limits. Okay, so we're going to go to population. And you'll notice now, in population, we have two other entries here. Why do we have two other entries in the population? What are these things? They're for the new parameters at the individual level. So we will simply say this dot mean duration of infection. So for the duration of infection, mean duration of infection, to assume for the agent, we'll just use the one in Maine, the value of the one in Maine by default. For contact rate, we'll just use the contact rate in Maine by default. So everyone in the population will by default get the values of mean duration of immunity. Oh, sorry, that should mean mean duration of infection, not immunity. Man, that was a close call. Infection. Infection. It's one of the problems with the autocomplete. Sometimes you autocomplete the wrong thing and you don't notice it. There it is. So ladies and gentlemen, Maine has these two parameters, mean duration of infection and contact rate. We give it values for that. What gives it the values of parameters in Maine are given by what? By the, I've said it many times, by the experiment. So the experiment is going to give the default values to use for contact rate and mean duration of infection for everyone. For the population, we're just passing those down to each person in the population by default. Unless we intervene on them, that's the value we're going to give them. That's the value we're going to give them, is just the default values. But in the intervention, we're going to be able to undertake an intervention to change out the value of those parameters from under them, in which case, and they actually use their own values of these. They're actually referring within their logic to their contact rate, their own, and this recovery to their own. Their own contact rate and their mean duration infection start, we give them ones initially that are the same as for the whole population for Maine. But if an intervention alters them for themselves, for that particular person, they'll use that. Okay, we're almost done. We just have some small touch-up to do. Number one, touch-up. We have to deal with the fact that people are added in by immigration. For those people, we're also going to give them the contact rate and the duration of infection that's used in Maine, okay? So you notice now when we add a person to the population, it wants to know the mean duration of infection and the contact rate. I'm doing autocomplete and saying, hey, it's saying, give me these four things. Birth time we already have. Initial infection state. Now we need mean duration of infection and contact rate. We'll just give them the values in Maine. So I'll say this dot mean duration of infection. Boom. Just like that. Yours doesn't have to make the sound, but it can be good if it does. This dot contact rate. Boom. Okay. This is in Maine. Sometimes I'll tell you a secret. Christine even makes that sound sometimes now. So what did I do? Ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you, in Maine, we have mean duration of infection and contact rate, which is the default one to use for people in the population. We specify it to the people in the population when we create the initial population, and we specify when it comes in through immigration, we use the ones in Maine as well as the default. But after that, they use them as their own. Each person has their own assumptions about this. By default, they're the ones in Maine, but they actually refer to their own assumptions about them, which gives the flexibility to use their own. A parameter, ladies and gentlemen, of their own. And that allows the intervention to modify it on a per-person basis, what their assumptions are, to have it be different than the contact rate for the whole population or mean duration for the whole population. So we specify when we create the initial population, by default for people, use the one in the population. When we immigrate people, we say by default, use the one in Maine. That's why it's this. We're in Maine. This refers to Maine. This contact rate. And now, in the crowning jewel, well, at least the last piece of the puzzle, we're going to do it for births that are added into the population. Where do births live in this model? Not the maternity ward. It's in person. Okay. It's in person, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to add that birth into the population, and we have to tell it those last two things, ladies and gentlemen. We have to tell it mean duration of infection and contact rate. So we need to say Maine dot mean duration. We're adding this baby into the population. We need to give it the mean duration of infection for the Maine, the default one there. Unless the intervention has changed it, we're going to use the one in Maine, and Maine dot contact rate. Maine, not mean. It's mean dot, not mean dot Maine. Maine dot mean. Maine dot contact rate. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the puzzle is complete. At least on my computer. If it's not on yours, press build and see if it's a happy camper. If it's not, the TAs, lean and hungry, awaiting lunch, will, I was going to say descend on you, but they'll come and help you facilitate your finish up so they can go to lunch as well.
Most of them are vegetarian. It's okay.
Good. Okay, that sounded ravenous. TAs descend on the participants. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't invite questions. It's almost punishing people with questions. The TAs eat them. Hopefully that's not why it's called a boot camp. Okay, so we're going to build this model. Is it building okay for you folks? Okay, now we can run it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what you've done is a thing of beauty. More than that, it's a thing of glory. Ladies and gentlemen, here we've specified, we need to go to lower intervention duration, and we need to actually perform the intervention. So if we want to lower the intervention duration by a factor of 2 for the person at issue, what do we have to put as the logic here? We're going to lower it by a factor of 2. We're going to say person dot mean duration of infection divided by equals 2.0. We divide it by a factor of 2. Or you can multiply it times equals 0.5. Or if you want to write it out longhand, you can do so. You could write out here equals this divided by 2.0. That's also fine. Here, it's setting their mean duration of infection to be the half of what it is for the specific person who is in the intervention group. We could create another, having done that, make sure it builds. The TAs are mobilizing. Okay, stand ready for mobilization. Okay, okay, ladies and gentlemen, who needs TA help? The TAs can help you overcome this one There's one final resolution. Okay? Okay. They either don't need help or they're beyond help. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to now copy this scenario and paste it above. And we'll say paste. And we'll go down to the one that's pasted in. And we will say lower contact rate. Lower contact rate in ages 0 to 10 with birth. And how will this differ from the last one? Can anyone say? Well, we need to divide their contact rate by 2.0. Ladies and gentlemen, because I don't see anyone swooning yet, I don't see anyone swooning, which means the full beauty of this may not be fully sinking in. But what we've achieved here is we have different scenarios. Each scenario can have different interventions that it undertakes upon its own custom subset of the population. We could have some scenarios which say, I want to intervene in those 10 to 20 years old. I want to intervene in those between ages 0 to 5, or I want to intervene in those 50 to 60. We could have those, and we could, for each intervention, we could choose how it intervenes to change the contact rate, change the infection duration. We could even, if we wanted to do so, do the following. We could copy this. I'm going to lower the contact rate, again, among those, not 0 to 10, but among the highest contact individuals. So I'm going to lower the contact rate in high degree centrality individuals with birth. And here, whether they're in the intervention group depends on their degree centrality. It depends on the get connections number. This is the criteria here. Get connections number is greater than, let's say, 8. I'm going to intervene on that. In short, each scenario, each experiment can specify its criteria by which to intervene on a group, a targeted group. This is the criteria for being in the targeted group. Here, it's my connections number. I have more than 8 connections. For this one, it's my age is less than or equal to 10. And then each scenario can specify, as it sees fits, how to change people in the intervention group. I want to change their contact rate. I want to change their infection duration. I want to change the duration of immunity. I want to lower their contact, the number of contacts they have, or what have you. I could disconnect them from some of their contacts. What this allows is targeted interventions without changing the underlying model. All we have to do is add a new scenario, and we can undertake interventions in defined subsets of the population. Here, I lowered, for example, the contact rate in high degree centrality people at the starting time. And so I've affected those individuals in terms of their contact rate by a factor of 2, thereby blunting the degree to which those individuals are infected. So for each person who matched this criteria, who had their at least more than 8 connections, I changed their contact rate by a factor of 2. The others I left unchanged. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a lot to have achieved, especially on an empty stomach and with an instructor such as this. Okay? So I would like to now put this model to bed rest. Christine raises no objection. Hearing no objection, I'm going to save it. I'm going to post the model, post haste, as version 20. Fortunately, we need not wait for it because the buffet waits for us. Okay? So we're going to visit now the buffet and all its resplendent offerings.
You need to stop reading those old emails. You bring me up to times, it's chow time.
Okay. And we'll reconvene for the brave-hearted who wish to return following lunch, where we'll be discussing several important topics. Calibration, big data, combining big data in these models, resources for further study, and as time allows, some explorations of one or two other high priority topics. Thank you very much for your patience, forbearance, despite the pangs of hunger.
It's not a big deal.
Okay.